So the title of our webinar today is Empowering Non-Specialist Science Teachers, where we'll share some strategies for effective support that we've discovered over the many years that we've been developing the Science Mastery Subject Excellence Programme. And this is the team that's going to be presenting today. I'm Kathleen, and I'm the Head of Science Mastery Secondary. If you could unmute Joe and Eva, you can introduce yourselves, please.
Yes, I'm Jo. I'm the Principal Design Lead for Science Mastery. So my responsibility is the whole design of the programme.
Hiya, I'm Eva. I'm one of the Strategic Partnerships Managers for Art Curriculum Plus. So I help the schools that we currently work with across all programmes, but I was an ex-science teacher, so I'm slightly biased towards our science programme.
Great, thank you. Just to kick us off, we're going to start with a quick poll where we'd like you to answer the following question. Which of these most closely describes your department? So if you read the 6 options, a poll should pop up now. And if you could spend a few seconds just answering which is the closest to your context. And Joe, once there's some responses, can you explain the results? Because I can't see them on my screen at the moment.
Yes, I will do. I think you should be able to see the results when I close the poll, but
right.
we're at about 60% completed just now, so I'll give it another 30 seconds or so. There we are. So we'll stop there. I'm just going to share the results, so hopefully you can see them. But most of us are actually fully staffed, which is amazing. I say a majority, which we were really not expecting. Actually, mostly fully staffed, but with gaps in specialisms. I think we didn't actually ask, but I think we can safely assume that most of those gaps would be physics related. Fully staffed with high proportions of early career teachers, and not fully staffed with gaps in specialisms. Yeah, so basically exactly as we were expecting, and hopefully this webinar is helpful for all of you in those different situations.
Thank you, Joe. And the next thing, can you please pop in the chat, thinking about your context, can you give one way that you or your department currently supports those non-specialist teachers who have been asked to teach out of specialism? We'll just wait for 1 minute until 4 minutes past for that. Thank you. We've got some responses in the chat. Sharing resources and attending courses, having CPD in department, but also use of external STEM-related CPD and sharing a scheme of work. Some of these we are going to touch on today, so it's interesting and really exciting to see that people are already implementing some of those strategies already. Okay, so it's 5 minutes past, so we're going to continue now. So for the next sort of 20 minutes or so, Joe and I are going to talk through 5 different types of strategies that we've encountered, as I said, as we've developed Science Mastery and seen what's working really well in our partner schools. And then after that, Eva will talk a bit more about the programme itself. So the first thing is having linked and embedded CPD, and some of you in the chat have already alluded to this, and it's crucial that this CPD has been identified ahead of time relative to the needs of the team, but also planned really carefully. So not a one-off event. We all go off to the IOP and we learn about electricity for a day. it has to be timely and planned in at the right time. So in response to that, what we've seen working well in Science Mastery is that each department has a dedicated mastery lead. And that person is responsible for not only the sort of smooth running and implementation of the program, but they have to think carefully about the needs of the team and plan out, like I said, where those CPD opportunities will be throughout the year. To support that, we actually send out a really quick survey at the start of the academic year where teachers can assess themselves where their PD needs are. It might be physics subject knowledge, for example. And also senior leaders and middle leaders are invited to complete that too. And I took a screenshot of one of the schools that I support so you can see the text is tiny, sorry about that, but you can see the different sort of types and strands of PD that we offer. And the bottom three are biology, chemistry, and physics subject knowledge. And in this case, the second bar is promoting language and communication. So at this point, there'll be a conversation with the mastery lead, with their development lead from our team to plan out, well, what does this mean? What have you got access to? What do you need support with? And when can it be implemented throughout the year? So top tips related to that then that you can take away, and I think some of you are already doing it from what you said in the chat, is as a department or with your own leadership team, identify the priority areas, because you cannot address every single PD need across the year, but it's the highest leverage things that you need to focus on. And secondly, look at the long-term plan. When are we teaching these particular electricity units in Key Stage 3 and 4? And figure out, for example, right, well, we've got actually an inset day before then. I'm going to take an hour, I'm going to get some physics expertise in, or I'm going to take this resource and I'm going to run some PD to support physics subject knowledge. And that is the most impactful way to ensure that it's bite-sized, comes at the right time, and relevant to what you're about to teach. So the second of the five strategies we're going to talk about is about co-planning. Now, before I dive in to talking about co-planning, can you pop in the chat what you think is the most difficult topic to teach for a non-specialist? Maybe think back to the days when you started teaching. So we've got a couple of physics topics already. I would agree with the electricity. I know that was my big gap when I started teaching. And I didn't realize what I didn't know. I thought, yeah, I can draw a circuit. I understand the difference between series and parallel. But when it comes to explaining models and doing them properly, that's when I realized I needed my physics buddy to explain it to me properly. Electromagnetism. Yeah, I think we're sort of on a similar line there, that there's some really hard physics that we sometimes don't dedicate enough time to. Thank you. So when we talk about co-planning, what do we mean? You may be doing it, you might not be doing it, or you might call it something different. What it is it's protected time as a team in a regular way. Could be every week, could be fortnightly, could be monthly, where you talk about upcoming units to teach and you have peer support amongst teachers to identify key content to be taught, the sequencing, possible misconceptions, and that allows teachers to situate units or lessons in the bigger picture, as in what's happening across the 5 years as the big idea of what any biology, chemistry, or physics big idea progresses, but to ensure that there's some knowledge of the development of that knowledge or skill over time. So this is what we have seen work well in schools. When we started out designing this program, we said, go do co-planning. It's great. There's evidence that it's really helpful. And in ARC schools, we do it quite regularly across the schools, and it works really well. But there wasn't like a tangible resource that we could hand over to a mastery lead to support them in running co-planning. And this is what I'm going to talk about now, which we have created, and we call them unit preparation booklets. So as the name suggests, Each unit has one of these booklets, and it's to do that sort of intellectual preparation together during co-planning. They include, for example, the scope and sequence of a unit. So here's a P4.4 electric circuits one, which is a year 10 unit. That's a screenshot of the scope and sequence page. So the scope will explain what's going to be included in this unit, and the sequence both covers the flow of lessons throughout the unit. Why are you teaching it in this order? And that helps a non-specialist to think, oh yeah, I'm going to recap Ohm's law, of course, before I do the investigation of the resistance of a wire. And then it also situates it in the bigger picture of what came before and what will come in the future. It also contains a section about common mistakes, errors, and misconceptions. And we all know, if you're not experienced and you're not a specialist in your subject, it can be really hard to preempt common misconceptions and errors if you don't know the content really well. So this is why outlining them in a document like this can be really supportive to those non-specialists. And there's loads in this brilliant booklet, but one final thing that I wanted to say is that the learning objectives are in there for the whole unit, but they're the support given in there about whether it's a stretch or it's absolutely critical to moving on in the future. So that, again, non-specialists get to, hold that really valuable information to make planning decisions for the needs of their class. And finally, we also provide specific training and coaching for the mastery leads so that they can run effective co-planning sessions to allow all the lovely things I've just described to be enacted and be effective in that precious, precious team time. So based on that, our top tips would be, as a department, or if you can't timetable that, it could be small group work, try some co-planning for an upcoming unit. And some of the following prompts might be useful. So what are the most important outcomes for the unit? Where will it lead? What should students know coming in? What's that prerequisite knowledge? And have you tested that they've got it? And what are students likely to find difficult and why? That's along the line of this misconceptions page, so that people can start thinking about preempting it and figuring out what to do to respond if they do hold that misconception. And I'll just pause for a second because we've got a quote from a SLT link for one of our partner schools, Skegness Academy, who made a comment about co-planning. I just wanted to draw your attention to that word of consistency, because that's quite a lot of the feedback that we hear is you improve consistency when you provide documents like I just showed, because it doesn't matter if you, for example, you've got no chemistry knowledge, say, and you really struggle with that. If you can access some of the pedagogical content knowledge support and some of that co-planning and supporting each other, you can improve consistency across your team. I'm going to hand over to Jo now to talk about the next bit.
Thank you. So Kathleen's gone through a couple of bigger picture strategies that we've found have worked really, really well in our schools over the last few years. I think just one thing that I would add quickly is that we have been piloting Key Stage 3 over the last 4 years and Key Stage 4 for the last 2 years. So this has come from a mixture of Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 teachers and what has come out of those programs, and all of our feedback from teachers and from SLT and heads of department into really making the programme as good as it can be and in supporting teachers as much as we possibly can. The next couple of strategies that I'm going to go through are more focused on short-term things and how we can support teachers with particular lessons and actual subject knowledge development in a little bit more of a timely and right at the time that they need it manner. So the third strategy is all about specialist input. And this is one that a few people mentioned right at the start, is sharing resources and using specialists to share their knowledge with our departments. If you are lucky enough to have a physicist, I'm sure you are already using their lessons. And if you've got heads of chemistry, heads of biology, or different people doing different subjects, then hopefully you've got different people writing lessons and sharing their lessons. And ideally just being a collaborative department, not teachers in isolation, just creating loads more work for themselves. When we say specialist input, what we actually mean is a subject specialist, basically a physicist for physics topics, a chemist for physics topics, but also just science teachers for all science topics, because we know in a lot of our schools, we've got maths teachers, we've got IT teachers, we've got tech teachers, PE teachers that are all teaching at least Key Stage 3 science, and in some cases GCSE science as well. So even though you think like, oh, I might not be the most experienced person in my department, if you've got someone in your department who has never taught science before, your specialism, your experience is still really, really useful for them. So sharing lessons can be absolutely invaluable in terms of workload and supporting other teachers. But some teachers might need more support than that. I think if I think back to my early days of teaching and some schools that we visit now, if you go in and somebody has sent you a lesson, or even if you download a lesson from TES and somebody's written their review of it, which is like, I wrote this lesson and it did really well for this Year 9 lesson on specific heat capacity or whatever. Then you download the lesson and you think, you have to click through the slides and think, right, well, what are they trying to get at there? There's a picture there, but what are they trying to say? What kind of questions should I be asking? What are the key points that you need to get out of it? And when you're using someone else's resources, that's really, really difficult, especially as a non-specialist, because we've all seen those teachers that are like, they'll stick an image on the screen, which is a skydiver falling, and they can just explain off the top of their head how that skydiver reaches terminal velocity. But for someone that's new, actually going through, or someone that's a non-specialist, actually going through the stages and having a few comments underneath that's like, right, step 1, step 2, step 3, and building that in a couple of key questions for the other teachers to get to the point of what was the intent behind that slide, what was the intent behind the lesson, what are the key outcomes, what are the objectives for the lesson. A lot of people will have them in the slides anyway, but particularly like, what do you want them to get out of a specific task? What should they be doing? And I'm really, really hoping that in terms of saving everyone time, that answers are included, because it's so intimidating as a non-specialist teacher to have to go to someone and say, I'm actually not sure what the answer was to that one. And if you've got questions, if you've got tasks on slides, on resources that you're sharing with people, include some guidance, include some answers. It's so intimidating to have to go and say, I'm actually not sure, can you explain it to me? But if you have that, just when teachers need it, as they're preparing for the lesson, as they're planning that lesson, then they can think, oh, that really doesn't make sense, or oh, that's the light bulb moment. So giving that guidance is really, really useful. So what does this look like in science mastery? Well, this is one of the things that we are absolutely proudest of, and that we get really, really great feedback, which is an absolutely enormous job. So please don't feel like this is something that you need to add into all of your lessons, because we were counting up numbers of lessons, and between Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 science, there's over 700 lessons, which is a huge project. But in all of our lessons, so there's notes, there's guidance that comes with every single PowerPoint. Now, for some slides, that's possible misconceptions. For some, that's how to run a demonstration. For others, it's literally walking through the exposition. What are the key points? And they've all been written by subject specialists. So exactly as they would have delivered it themselves. And in a lot of cases, it's as they have planned the lesson for themselves and then come back to tweak it, which has been really, really great. So it's going through, what would they say? What answers would they be expecting from students each time? What are the misconceptions? Where are they likely to go wrong? And we've found those really, really useful. But what can that mean? What can you do with that? Anywhere that you are sharing resources, use your specialist teachers, use experienced teachers that have taught things a few times, that know what comes up in exams? What are the common things? What are the key words that people have to, that students have to include? And just ask those teachers, they're sharing those resources anyway, just ask them to put a couple of notes in, like, this is a question to ask, this is something to watch out for, this is the aim, this is the demonstration, links to videos, like subject knowledge development videos, anything that will actually support them. Because sometimes you'll look at it, and as the person that's written it, you know exactly what you're thinking, but that's not always clear to someone else teaching that lesson. So that's the third one, specialist input. The fourth one is practical skill development. Now, we know that science is different to most other subjects in the fact that it's actually 3 subjects, but then it's practical as well. So there's a huge amount to get through in science. And so for this one, this is sort of non-specialist scientists at all, but also physicists, chemists, and biologists, because there is so much. There's so much to get through in the GCSE in terms of content, but at the same time, you've got to get through, I want to say hundreds, but that's a little bit of a hyperbole, all of these skills that students need to do, and they need to be good at them. They need to have had time to practice them. They need to be able to apply them both to the required practical context and to different contexts. So what we found, sorry, Kathleen, really quickly. So what we found for practical skill development, the 2 most important things are breaking the practical skills into components to make them manageable for non-specialists, and providing mapping and guidance to see how, so that non-specialist teachers can see how skills develop and are critically assessed over time. So what does this look like in science mastery? So all of our practical skills are broken down into components. Now, we've used AQA's working scientifically skills, and we've broken them down into 100 working scientifically skills. So that involves like maths skills, working like a scientist, measuring, drawing conclusions. There's all of the different categories of skills, but they're broken into components. So what that means is for drawing a graph, for example, drawing a graph, there's about 5 different skills that go into it. So instead of the skill just being, instead of the required practicals, students can draw a graph. Instead, that's broken down into the components, which are identify the variables so they can work out which goes on which axis, choose a suitable scale, because we can never have enough practice of that, drawing a line of best fit, drawing conclusions from the shape of data. Like there's so many different things that go into that for a non-specialist, if you just say, draw a graph, they are not always going to be aware of what students need to be able to do first to build up to that bigger, more composite skill. In Science Mastery, all of our 100 component skills are mapped across the 5 years, right through Key Stage 3 up to Key Stage 4, so that they are encountered at least 3 times. Some I've covered a lot more than 3 times, like variables is covered in a lot of practicals, because we know that that's something that students will still struggle with. So it's most of them are, well, all of them are covered 3 times. Some of them are covered more times, and covered across, where possible, across chemistry, biology, and physics, so that students are meeting them in different contexts. Some skills have a whole dedicated lesson. So things like variables, calculating or estimating uncertainty, the risks and hazards, some skills where they actually need a dedicated lesson. Those are there, and then we also have our series of maths and science lessons, which have been developed in collaboration with Maths Mastery. Sorry, my animations are at the wrong time here. Those are the practical skills that are broken down into the 100 skills and then mapped through our units. This is just an example of one of our standalone skills lessons, which is part of one of our chemistry units, and then our 25 maths and science lessons. So those focus on 25 basically of the key maths skills that students are expected to know and to be able to use, which is then planned over year 7, year 8, up to year 11, and so that they fit in at the right time. So proportionality, that's in year 8 when students are looking at resistance and the length of a wire. Probability comes up when students do genetics, that we've mapped our maths and science lessons so that maths skill is when students is covered when students need it, and after it's been covered in maths, so that we're using the same consistency and the same language, because we know there's a lot of differences in language between maths and science. So we try to minimize that a little bit. What can you actually do? Because this is a big project again, but break practical skills into components. So instead of going through a required practical and saying, right, draw a graph, prepare a soluble salt, like just the whole skill, break them into manageable chunks so that non-specialist teachers can get through each bit and know whether students are achieving that. Map these so that they're manageable over time. This one is probably the most important. I think as a result of COVID, it's even worse, but we know we've got so much catching up to do. We've got gaps to fill, but we've still got to get through a huge amount of content. And actually what that's meant is that when teachers have a practical lesson, when they have a practical activity to do, they try and fit in every single practical skill because they feel like there's not other opportunities for it. And that means actually you're covering all the skills, but you're not covering them well. And students actually haven't got the opportunity to get better at them and to practice them. So map them over time in manageable chunks. The fifth strategy, which a lot of our program is really towards good science teaching, but something that we know is really important is exam technique, and really, really difficult for non-specialists, because you can't, I mean, even as any science teacher, you can't be a specialist in biology, chemistry and physics, because unless you've got all the time in the world, which is not possible as a science teacher, you can't be marking an actual examiner for all of the subjects, and picking up the exam technique and sharing that with non-specialist teachers is really, really useful. So actually using resources to explicitly develop exam technique can support non-specialists to understand specifically how knowledge and skills are assessed. So in Science Mastery, what does this look like? In each of our Key Stage 4 lessons, so just a quick side note there, we are really specific about exam technique being a Key Stage 4 thing. That's not something that we want to drill at Key Stage 3. At Key Stage 3, we want it to still be all about understanding and application rather than mark schemes by rote. So it's very much a Key Stage 4 skill. So in each Key Stage 4 lesson, we have an I, we, you lesson. I think this is why terminal velocity was in my head. So looking at graphs of terminal velocity. So in this example, the teacher will go through one example. So what's happening here, the modeling, what kind of answer is expected and how to structure your answer. Then as a class, you can practice it with the we activity, with the we part of the cycle, and then students have an opportunity to do it themselves first before practicing more, before having an opportunity to do more independent practice. So those have been really, really popular and have actually helped a lot of non-specialist teachers through, because they're all based on really common exam style, exam assessment requirements. All of our Key Stage 4 lessons have got worksheets that are scaffolded quite similarly to exam papers, where they start with section A, which is like one-word answers or multiple choice or quick recall, basically your AO1 section. And then section B is more of your AO2, apply, analysing, putting things in different contexts. And then section C, which we love, is making links between that topic and different areas of science. So if you're looking at pressure, the section C might be the pressure in the heart of a whale, where you then look at the structure of the heart, and really nice links, which hopefully and we have found that teachers like those to help students actually enjoy the bigger picture of science and see that it's not just physics, or it's not just this lesson on its own, but it all does fit into this bigger picture. We've also got our exam technique activities. So this is a screenshot of one of those. So some of those are what we call mark it activities, where students are given a model answer with a very, very common mistake in, where they go through and work out what marks that would have been given. Other ones are prepare students with where to plan, and setting out command words and giving students practice to do those. In all of our units, those are what we've found to be the most commonly assessed style of question, and teachers absolutely love those. We keep getting requests to have more and more of those, and we actually love writing them. But that's something that non-specialist teachers wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise, because it takes a lot of experience to know your subject and to know, what do students always get wrong? Why do they always make that same mistake? Like the one that we have in chemistry all the time is, and actually it's a thing with a lot of non-specialists, is why do molten ionic substances conduct electricity? And a lot of students will say, actually, I think that was the wrong one, but I think it was why do metals conduct electricity? And the mark scheme always says through, and students will always say throughout, which doesn't get them the mark. And so that specificity, a non-specialist wouldn't necessarily know to hone in on that. And that kind of thing is what we provide in our exam style mark schemes, and the guidance that goes along with that for teachers. So our top tips for supporting non-specialist teachers with explicit exam technique is to actually give non-specialist teachers time and exposure to exam questions. Give them an exam pro login, give them past papers, get them to do past papers. I know it's really intimidating again, but go through it as part of your co-planning, session. Why is this question really, really hard? And that can be really interesting if you look at it as from the point of view of, what are students likely to get wrong here, not as a test. What do you know here? But it can be a really good activity for a whole department to do, to support teachers and actually expose them to the demands. What should they be focusing on in the unit? What's really, really important? What comes up again and again? And again, involve non-specialists in moderation before teaching. Science is really specific and students need to give specific answers. And this is one of the things that we see most often with non-specialist teachers, is that they can put a lot of effort into preparing their lessons, but the language isn't quite tight enough. It's not quite specific enough. And so actually having them exposed to that bit of, they'll get the mark for this, but they wouldn't get that. This is what you need to say specifically. Exposing that to them before teaching can be so valuable, because it means it's fresh in their mind. They're thinking, right, I know I have to say this and not this, and I have to give students a bit of practice of that question. I think that is all I wanted to say for that. So I'm going to pass back to Kathleen for a little bit of a summary.
Thank you. So I hope you found some ideas or something new that you'd like to try from what we've described. But from what you've put in the chat earlier, I think some of these are already being used at the moment, which is great. So just to summarize, some types of strategies that we've seen working well to support non-specialists, it was having that linked and embedded CPD, having well-planned co-planning support, ensuring that specialist input is being used in the most efficient way, and having that practical skills development piece there, where you've got that breakdown of those skills into components to support non-specialists in teaching those really tricky skills development. And finally, the explicit exam technique, again, without having the experience of examining or having that subject knowledge, having activities and pre-planned things to share to support that exam technique can be really supportive. So I'm now going to hand over to Eva, who'll talk for about 10 minutes or so about science mastery more broadly, and then we'll have a few minutes left at the end for questions.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. So again, just for anyone that joined a little bit late, so I'm Eva. I'm one of the strategic partnerships managers at St Mary Art Curriculum Plus. Oh my gosh, the way I just said my old school name. But no, I was previously a science teacher, and so yeah, I help with across all the programs with people just getting involved with our programs when they join, as well as kind of making sure that people feel supported throughout their journey with us. But obviously science is my favorite. So Kathleen, if you could possibly please click through. So for anyone that's perhaps not aware, so the ARC Curriculum Plus is a non-profit organisation that's come out of the ARC Schools network. So we've got a number of ARC schools across the country, and now as a result of branching out into ARC Curriculum Plus, which is intertwined with ARC still, still heavily involved in the ARC schools. All of our programs are rolled out in the ARC schools, but now as a result of becoming an independent organisation, we now roll out programs across the country and have a reach, which means that we're able to standardise our assessments more effectively, as I'm going to come to later, and also just provide far more opportunities for collaboration, both within multi-academy trusts and outside of them. Next slide, please. So the specific, one of the USPs that we have as at our Curriculum Plus is that we have such an impact on our students, and we have kind of proven impact compared to, say, certain other programs for different various subjects. We do have impact that has been proven within our schools as well as outside of ARC schools, with Key Stage 3 pilot schools having been shown to make more progress from 7 to 9 when compared to the national cohort, and with the proportion of students achieving higher than national average increasing from 13 to 38% in year 7. So we've got some really, really strong student outcomes in data to support what we're doing, as well as all of the really nice things that Joe's saying about what we do to support staff as well. So our programs contain what we call our 5-step improvement process. And that 5-step improvement process has 5, again, core strands to it. And I'm going to talk through each one of the strands, which are kind of rolled out kind of concurrently across the various, like the duration of different schools' journeys with ARC. So the first one that the first strand within our 5-step improvement process is the school support. So next slide, please. So yeah, that's the one. So the school support will be delivered by one of our lovely science team. So the science team on our top 2 tiers, which are the launch tiers for all schools, are leadership and mastery. And on those tiers, you'll be allocated a development lead. So these development leads are all ex-science leads, all ex-secondary science leads, and they will meet with you in the summer term before a September start, or if you do a mid-year start, then before that as well, for a welcome call to kind of introduce, kind of get to know what the priorities are for the school, whether you've got any school improvement targets, and begins talking about face-to-face induction. So the support that they will provide you across the academic year and beyond will consist of school visits, where they'll come into the school. It can either be on an inset day, or it could be on a school day, depending on what you'd like to do. So it could be on an inset day, it could be predominantly CPD focused and perhaps strategy within the senior leadership, or working with the department as a whole. And on school days, it can then also consist of learning walks for different year groups, followed by feedback for specific staff on observations that they've made to try and help people to kind of continue to improve as practitioners. But it's by no means meant to be any of our team coming in telling everyone what to do. It's much more of a partnership approach where it's very, very collaborative. Then in addition, we've got online development sessions, which again are very, very tailored to what the school needs. So these development sessions can cover whatever the priorities are for you guys at the moment. So if it was you wanted to look at how to adapt physics resources, that could be something you wanted to do. If it was on how to deliver practicals, that could be that as well. So the development sessions, again, really, really bespoke to what you need within your department, and then ongoing support from those development leads via email throughout the academic year whenever you've got any queries and such. So the next strand that we have then is our continued professional development, and this contains a number of different elements. So all of our resources and CPD modules, e-learning modules, are housed on our My Mastery platform. So this has got our induction, this includes induction training. So the induction training is a module on My Mastery, which you can complete in your own time. But then in addition, at the beginning of the academic year in September, as well as at the end of summer too, preparing for September, if you're planning ahead that far ahead, there's face-to-face induction training too. So both face-to-face induction training as well as the online e-learning modules, as well as then teaching mastery courses, again, e-learning on the My Mastery platform, termly prepare to teach webinars, which have themes that are relevant to the units that are being taught, as well as then next one, the leadership certification, which is our kind of star resource, as that is really, really appealing to whoever is going to be allocated as the mastery lead, whether it's a head of science or a head of a specific science, whether it's physics, biology, chemistry. That leadership certification is really useful professional development as a leader as well, on your career journey. Then on to our next strand, which is then our assessment and data insights. Now, assessments can vary quite a lot within between schools, as different schools have quite different approaches. But the way that we do it is we provide both formative and summative assessments. So our formative assessments that we provide are both in the form of pre-unit and post-unit quizzes, which help you to inform your teaching before you begin a unit, as well as then responding to the needs of your learners at the end of the unit, so that you can assess whether any reteach opportunities are needed. So, and then all of these quizzes will then also have supplementary information saying exactly what to use, what things to focus on, depending on which misconceptions might have been identified. And then each lesson on an individual lesson level will also have a exit ticket at the end of the lesson, followed by a fix-it session at the start of the next lesson, which can be used much more informally by teachers to kind of, on a lesson by lesson basis, respond to the needs of their learners. Then the overall summative assessments we've got autumn term, spring term, and summer term assessments. The autumn and spring term are designed to be more diagnostic. So they are termly summative assessments, but these are kind of with the view to still be informing teaching throughout the academic year, rather than it always being a heavy emphasis on grades and becoming a grades factory. It's much more holistic and trying to help students to improve on their learning journey. So the autumn and spring assessments are 30 multiple choice questions, as well as a shorter written element. The multiple choice questions, very, very easy to mark. Again, massively reduces teacher workload, and the performance element very, very short, but is kind of slightly more exam style. And the end of year is then 2 45-mark science papers. So there's some examples of these within our program preview, and I'm happy to send this out to you guys afterward, because I know that assessments are often ones that people would like to see some examples of, but just to kind of see what the style is. But yes, then the next bit is then about our smart grade affiliation. So smart grade essentially help us to collate all of our attainment data across the country, so that all of our schools that work with science mastery are able to upload their termly, their summative data, and that data is then compared across our schools nationally, which helps schools, whether you're, again, a multi-academy trust or an individual school, to make sure that your students are performing in a representative way, and also help you to kind of benchmark a bit more representatively. Because I know with COVID, a lot of the last few years of internal data is often skewed, and you say, well, this is the data for this year group, but we have to bear this in mind. This is the data for this year group, we have to bear this in mind. This kind of doesn't have caveats to it. It just means that you can accurately benchmark. Then the next part, obviously, is one of the ones that people really, really want to know about. Obviously, it's the teaching and learning resources, the actual stuff. So Joe's already spoken a lot about this. So all of our teaching and learning resources are based on the elements of science mastery, which for us are factual and conceptual understanding, language and communication, maths, practical and inquiry skills, all feeding in towards the application of these knowledge and skills. So these are the foundations on which all of our resources are built. Now, the resources that are included within the program are both planning resources as well as teaching resources. So on the planning side, we have our curriculum maps, programs of study, unit preparation booklets, as mentioned by Kathleen, and unit overviews. And on the teaching side, we have our lesson slides, which are provided both in PDF and PowerPoint format, so that they're completely adaptable. Same with the worksheets. And the worksheets include things like maths and science, worksheets and lessons, maths and science, scientists in the spotlight, scientists in the nude, and news and what if. Oh my gosh, scientists in the nude. That's a very, very different type of worksheet. Apologies. But those are the kinds of resources that we have available for our partner schools. So moving on to the next part. So these are some examples of some of the resources that we have available and kind of some figures to put alongside it for both the Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 elements. So just to clarify here, these figures are all for our full 11 to 16 program, which has all Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 resources. We do also have a standalone Key Stage 3 program, but not the standalone Key Stage 4. It would be either Key Stage 3 or the full 11 to 16. Then we've got an example of one of our curriculum maps with the big idea in science kind of mapped out. There's one of these for physics, biology, and for chemistry. So these kind of show the points at which students will first encounter the knowledge, as well as the points at which it's revisited and in what level of depth. It's generally quite similar to the way that a lot of schools will teach it. However, some things have been put into different places dependent on what we think is going to be most effective, because we do have a 3-year Key Stage 3, whereas some schools might have a 3-year Key Stage 4. But this can be compared with what you're doing currently if you'd like to kind of check if there's any overlaps or lack of overlaps. And finally, as we've mentioned already, the kind of opportunities for collaboration that we have available, because we have so many schools across the country within our art network who meet annually at the conference, as well as in our termly webinars. We have lots of opportunities for schools to kind of find ones who are local to them, chat, share best practice, and just find other ways that are exciting that other people might be teaching science that people hadn't heard of. So yeah, that's kind of a whistle-stop overview of our Science Mastery Programme and the different elements of it. If anyone has any questions about any of what I've said, please feel free to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A function. But I've got my details also on the screen here. So if you want to drop me an email to kind of book in a call and kind of discuss in a little bit more detail, please feel free to do so. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Eva.
Jo and Kathleen.
So I'm going to stop sharing in a moment, and then if anyone wants to unmute and ask any questions, we'd be happy to take questions for a few minutes.